Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Dan Sarto, co-founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Animation World Network, and I'm happy to be here today with a panel of top animation industry experts to talk about something near and dear to my heart, and that's animation. More specifically, the animation production process, from concept to delivery, driven by real-time game engine technology. So why is this important? Why are we all here today? Well, right now, some of the most compelling and innovative animation being produced in practically every area of entertainment, from shorts to series to feature films, uses real-time animation, game engine, and motion capture tools that are part of a wave of brand new production methodologies. More and more studios and creative artists are exploring, testing, and fully implementing these new tools, which represent a real paradigm shift in entertainment development. Game engines have been around for years, and they've been crossing over into film and TV for quite some time. It wasn't that long ago I first started hearing about game engines being used on special projects in the previs world that eventually made their way into state-of-the-art virtual production pipelines on films like War of the Planet of the Apes and Rogue One, and episodics like Game of Thrones and The Mandalorian. We've certainly heard of recent uses of game engines to drive cameras on sets using LED walls, like George Clooney's recent Oscar-nominated Midnight Sky. But what about animation? Why are we hearing so much about game engine technology and real-time tools converging with film and TV production? I think it's safe to say we're beginning to see an explosion of work using this technology to power incredibly iterative creativity, with artists embracing brand new ways to design, rig, layout, animate, light, and render their work. The traditional linear pipelines used for decades are being upended by new ways of producing content that clear the way for fast, collaborative development from previs to production and post-viz. So, let's get to it. Let's start our discussion. Let's first meet our experts. David, why don't you lead off and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is David Prescott. I am the head creative SVP of creative production at DNEG Animation. And this is our first foray in animation into real time.
Jason, what about you?
I am Jason Chen. I'm the executive vice president of digital over at BRON Studios, a new real-time division in our animation world.
Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin Dart, and I'm the creative director and founder of a small animation and design studio in Los Angeles called Chromosphere.
And Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Dufilho with Unreal Engine. Excited to be here today. At Unreal, I'm creating spaces and opportunities for artists relative to real time.
It's a pleasure to see you all here today. And let's kind of dig into it. David, I'm going to start with you. Why now? Why is this explosive convergence happening now? And what are the practical and more strategic benefits?
I think it's been coming for a while. I think filmmaking from day one, from the very first films ever made, either live action or animation, have always been about using new methods and technologies, right? And I think that the animation industry has gone through these changes over the years from, cell to CG to everything. And something always happens within that where either a technology comes along or a filmmaker pushes something. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is find more time for the storyteller to tell the story. And so as this kind of game engine technology enters the world, it allows you to start to adjust the paradigm of animation and where you spend your time. At the end of the day, if you've got a 10-month cycle on some production, is there a way we can use this technology to not reduce that time, but move more of the time to the filmmaking and rather than just pushing data around?
So what you're saying is it's really being pushed by just trying to increase people's ability to be creative.
For us, that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to find a way, how do we enable our staff to always say yes to filmmakers, right? So what do we do with that? And can we use this tool set and readjust the paradigm of animation going forward? So what this allows us to do is to work and embrace different kind of filmmaking methods and being a lot more collaborative. So instead of this linear pipeline of you have storyboard, then you go into layout, and then you go down, how do you bring those people together? Because filmmaking is a collaborative business, right? If you're in live action and you're on stage, there's 50 people there trying to make the best image possible. But we silo this and piece by piece. And this way, for us at least, and the way we're approaching this is, can we get more people into the engine together to interact, to get out those happy moments, those incredible kind of feats of like, oh, but if we just tilt the camera that way, if we just adjust this. When it's so linear, you really are restricting the filmmaker to when they can make what notes. For most of animation, in CG animation, the filmmaker really gets to somewhere around 50% of the lighting. And that's when they first really actually see what their film's going to look like. You know, they go through layout in a rough version, they go through animation, but it's not really lit and this, and now they finally see it in lighting. And they would have made different decisions back in the kind of layout phase if they had known that. And so if we can compress that and give them real images as front end as possible, they will make different decisions in their filmmaking process. And that's what we experienced on our short. Mr. Spam Gets a New Hat is a short done by DNEG Animation and William Joyce. It's a silent film set in 1927. Mr. Spam is a budding engineer and visionary, but his job at the Hammers to Heads factory has really kind of destroyed his life and stuck his hat on his head all day. It thwarts any of his cheerful visions and memories of becoming realized. He lives next door to this lovely, talented, surrealist painter named Dot. She creates lively, ingenious painting for Mr. Spam and just gets it to him just in the nick of time. And it's all about love, daydreams, and surrealism as they're unleashed on everybody's life. And it premieres in North America at the Spark Animation Festival.
Kevin, from your perspective, why is this convergence happening now? What's kind of pushing it to happen now? And what are the practical and strategic benefits for you in the work that you're doing?
Well, I would say from our perspective as a smaller studio, we like to take on projects with really small teams of multi-talented people. And so we're always really excited by any sort of technology or software that makes the whole process more accessible, because the fewer specialized skills and departments of people you need, the smaller your teams can be. So I think with something like Unreal, it makes it more feasible to consider doing something like a 3D film with a really small crew. I mean, for years we've been doing smaller 2D films with really small crews, where you really, I mean, you could do it with one person, just from start to finish, storyboarding and animating it and finishing it. But with 3D, I think until the advent of tools like Unreal, it's been harder because there's just more steps with with modeling and rigging and lighting and rendering and all this stuff. But I think putting it all into the one tool makes it just more accessible to smaller teams of filmmakers like ourselves. And so we're always chasing those kinds of things because we just like iterating on ideas quickly and working in really fun, small, creative groups. And I see Unreal as kind of just breaking down a sort of a barrier of 3D animation filmmaking, which is why it's particularly appealing to us.
Jason, for you at BRON, what about from your perspective?
Well, I think it's been a long time coming. I think that real-time technology has been there from seeing real-time being displayed on a motion capture stage in grayscale form, and you know, kind of adding to what Dave was saying was that you know, it is a collaborative process. Filmmaking as a whole is a collaborative process. And I think there, especially with this past year, with everybody going remote, I think it's just an inevitable next step that we start to bring in more of these live action technicians into the fold of visual effects, of virtual production, to better achieve what the filmmaker has as a tool set. Because for a long time, there was a gap there where, you know, sometimes you'd leave a set and then not see a result until 6 months later. And now that the tools are available and that are lighting properly, displaying your character in its fully realized form at an earlier stage, it just enhances that creative process. And I think it's our job as facilitators of this technology and as people that are also really, really passionate about this technology to push it forward and make that transition from linear workflow into a more collaborative filmmaking on-set collaborative environment.
Karen, you've been producing with some of the most sophisticated animation production studios and pipelines that have ever been created. including feature films and virtual reality, Google Spotlight stories. What's your take on this?
Well, I have a bit of a mantra that is that I actually stole this quote from a woman who's the creative director of the Harlem Museum. And it is, when I have questions, I go to artists. And I think that's a great umbrella for sort of what we're talking about, because I think that when artists have questions, they go to their art and that's where all this great collision is that I think everyone's sort of referencing. And in the real-time space, going from like a very traditional, this happens space, very gatekeepery, going into real-time and inheriting sort of the legacy of games, what it also inherited is that legacy of collaboration and that legacy of iteration. And you've got this momentum of curious artists and curious groups of people, and all of that is just colliding at this really wonderful time. And boom, we've got really great work going out there. And certainly it's because it's changed the pipeline, and certainly because it's going to change budgets and change everyone's approach. But it's also allowing that special thing, which is being able to iterate on story, being inside of your show, inside of your characters, maybe even if you're using motion capture in this new way. And so all of that newness, I think the result of that is also going to be something new in the actual output and in the product. Much like when we go from 2D animation to 3D animation, right? We learned new words, there's new vernacular, there's new approaches, there's new artists on the scene. I think this is as much of a shift. I think all those things will result as well. New artists, new vernacular, new projects. And for me, I always see myself as an enabler of that. I've been very lucky to kind of have that position in my life and, be able to offer that and get those answers hopefully going amongst the artists to those questions that we have.
Well, as trailblazers, so to speak, you lead the charge in integrating and kind of adapting new technologies to show people how they can do it, which is part of what we're here to talk about. Kevin, I want to jump back to you. As you mentioned, you come from a more traditional stylized 2D production world. As an artist, producer, and director, what does this new way of creating mean for you in your studio? What are the biggest shifts in thinking for pipeline and workflow, and how things used to be done to how they're done now? And how does this relate to your Yuki 7 project?
So Yuki 7 is a project we've been developing kind of on the back burner at our studio for a couple of years. It's a big mashup of all these kinds of things we love, like spy movies and monsters and action films and all this kind of stuff rolled into one. One of the big driving motivations behind it is we've sort of fallen in love with this really hyper stylized kind of 2D, 3D production pipeline at our studio over the years. And we wanted to do a project where we could really just sort of do everything we've ever wanted to do in a project, like throw in 2D effects and 3D scenes that are mixing 3D and 2D characters all together. And so we came across Unreal while we were already in production on the pilot episode we were doing. Karen introduced us to it. And at first I was like, I don't understand what this would have to do with anything. Like we don't know how to use this. It's an independent project we're doing. It's just something that we're sort of guiding ourselves and having fun. And I thought maybe this project could actually enable a lot of the stuff that we're doing. Maybe, our pipeline is actually perfectly suited for the Unreal Engine. And so as new as Unreal is for our studio, I think we're always sort of trying to work in sort of non-traditional ways. And I think because we're such a small studio, it's allowed us to really quickly experiment with new techniques. Like for like a straight 3D pipeline, I would say Unreal is one of the most straightforward things we've come across. Like every other time we've tried to do a project that involved 3D, there were just so many steps. And we used to work in a way where if we animated in 3D, we would render everything out and then go through a really intensive compositing process to tweak the images and play with how it looked and everything, basically to make the 3D look like something other than 3D. And so now I think Unreal has sort of given us access to a 3D world that we can actually get to look the way we want it without having to take it through a whole nother pipeline and process it in this different way. Because it's opened up these tools to us, we can create our own materials and shaders in there and get these looks that we're after, but all happening in one place. So to me, it's just really exciting because it means maybe we don't need such a big team to do a stylized 3D project, or maybe the fact that it's all happening in one place means we could consider doing like more interactive projects that have these stylized looks, that like stylized 3D looks. And so what I think has been kind of maybe more of a sequestered, like high-end kind of 3D production that you needed like a big studio to do, and just sort of making that more accessible to other filmmakers and smaller teams.
Jason, I want to jump back to you. What does the engine-driven technology mean for you in your studio, and what are your biggest shifts in thinking for pipeline and workflow from how things used to be done to how they're done now, and how is this relevant to your Fables project?
Fables is a reimagining of classical stories of tales of morality based off of Aesop's fables, told in a new light. We have an amazing cast, which will be released soon, but our narrator is Ricky Gervais. It's an 8-episode series, 30 minutes apiece, and it's going to be coming out soon. So I'll be honest with you. The initial thought of this was not welcomed with real open arms from the traditional animation set of artists. It was very, everyone was a little bit skeptical, and people weren't sure of it because it's a new way of thinking. It is completely taking a system that has been in place for decades and literally ripping out infrastructure and saying, we need a brand new way to think about this. So it was a combination of the foresight of our CEO, Aaron, and the president of BRON, Brenda, that were just on the same page that something needed to change in the animation space. You have a project that would last 4 years. You've had 200, 300 plus people at the peak of things. And it's just a lot. It's a lot to do. There's a lot of time that goes into a product. And they were so supportive when we came up with the idea of, okay, this is going to be not popular, but we need to rip everything out. Take what we love about live action workflows, look at it from the million mile high perspective. What do we love about live action? What do we love about traditional animation? What do we love about VFX workflows? Take all those highlighted bits. Don't think about the interconnectivity from that first step, and then place all those things on the wall and then figure out per project, per specifics of the project, which parts and modules you're going to use. And I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind for the future, is that for every single project, they have their own unique demands. And we want this to be just as accessible of a tool set to live action directors as it would be to VFX supervisors, animation directors, et cetera, et cetera. It shouldn't just be siphoned off to someone that is technically savvy, because, art isn't like that. Art is expression. So how we really are trying to think about this is that this is really the next generation of filmmaker that are going to be using this, because it's free. It is the easiest way to create your own world, your own environment, and the only limitation is what you put on the page or what you come up with in here. I think it's very important for us to share within our community for that next generation of digital filmmaker and content provider.
Love that. Love that. I love how you guys are just blurring all the lines over there.
Very well put. David, I want to jump over to you. What about at DNEG? How does your new short, Mr. Spam Gets a New Hat, fit into all of this?
For some years now, our president, Tom Jacob, and I have been talking and mulling over, there has to be a better way to do this. We spend so much time, we spend this. For me, when I got into animation from visual effects, I was so frustrated by that, like asking directors to make these commitments on layout. And I'm like, what the heck is that about? And why are we lighting afterwards? Because that's backwards. You light something on set first, then you put the camera. And so there was a lot of backwards for me. And so for years, I was trying to find another way to approach it. And as I was going to DNEG, I had had a conversation with Kim Libreri at Epic, and I'd said, I really want to embrace this, and I want to find a way to bring the best, kind of like what Jason was saying, the best of both worlds together. And it's time to change this. Big projects are hard to really tear the rug out from underneath things. When you have a couple of hundred people on a project, et cetera, and you're going to take a massive risk on a production pipeline. So what we set off with was, what is this real-time thing mean, right? What is real-time? What does it mean for us? Can we completely change how productions are done? And so we approached it. What I wanted to know was, should you do this on a big feature? What would it mean? What does your staffing profile change? What does your production mean? What are dailies? Can't we just put the director on a game engine? Can we connect him to a home console and he just watches dailies from the engine? Because you don't need to render it out if we can run it fast enough. And right down to the core, how does it change dailies? So with that in mind, I'd been having a conversation with Bill Joyce for a while about wanting to do a project together, and I knew what his library was. And so I approached him. I was like, I know you've got a couple of shorts out there. Maybe there's one that could really push this technology, and we could finish this short and go, this is how we would approach a feature. So that was our goal. Our goal was not to write, some new fancy piece of engineering, although we have some really cool ideas on what we're going to do with that in Unreal. But ours was, how do you change production? How would you approach a big show? Like I said, what are dailies? And that's an interesting thing that happened to us, is we got to a point where there was a few days where dailies just weren't going well. And we were like, what's going on? This is not really working. So I called Bill and I had a conversation with him, and I'm like, what's up? Something's not gelling. And what it was he was seeing animation, clothing, and lighting in real time. And while he was making comments, people were moving lights around and everything. And as a director in animation, just was not ready for that. You're just not used to it. And so it took a moment for us to go, okay, let's approach dailies differently. And so we just had to rethink that. And Bill had to change the way he worked with us because he just wasn't used to that. And so those kinds of things are what we went to go look for, right? Which that was our kind of purpose of it. And now as we go forward, a little bit of what Jason mentioned, we're looking at this tool from multiple platforms. Obviously, the layout front end, it's just a done deal, right? That's where you should be using this, etc. But we have animation tools out there that animators have been on for a very long time, and motion capture pipelines and all these kind of things. And so for us, it's really approaching each project the right way around. I have always had the philosophy that you use the right tool for the job. So we're not going to start jamming projects into Unreal if they're not the right project and it's not the right tool for that project, because that's the same way. So for us, we wanted to finish the project with as many yeses as nos, right? We wanted to know the goods and the bads and the uglies of the whole thing. And at the end of the day, it's the bads and the uglies just do not compare to the amount of goods, and so will be a heavy, heavy factor in future features and episodics for us, for sure.
Karen, I want to drag you into this now. Jason, Kevin, and David have pretty much just covered some of the most important and key issues framing the entire discussion. How can you kind of circle those all around and, from your perspective, tie that all together to help us draw the most important things from what they're sharing?
It's this real-time technology and the conceptual thinking that it takes and the technical expertise and the just go-for-itness that all these folks have and everyone sort of in our community does is super, super important. But at the end of the day, right, it's a tool. And I use this pen differently than you do. And so that's a wonderful thing about it. You might want to use it more front end. I'm doing a lot of work now understanding or thinking about other utilities of Unreal, like as a story tool, and how much it really allows you to iterate on your story, taking your story out of the page and putting it in real space and time. And that's a shift that changes everything. It activates completely different parts of your brain. So, but more directly to your question, what I'm amazed at is one, the generosity, the natural generosity of the community. But we've been able to also, help, bootstrap and support some of these projects, a variety. All these folks are all doing really different projects, and versus having it inside, of Unreal and doing it ourselves and making it perfect and then showing you the result. So warts and all, right? Take the tool, use it as you wish. We're not going to prescribe, but we are there. We'll support you in every way. And then we have a feedback loop. Now you're going to tell us, here's what works, here's what's glorious, here's what was really good. And we're going to say, well, let's go make it great and get there together. So I think that that's something I want everybody to really know. Like one of the reasons that connects all of us and these projects is because of that feedback loop, right? And because we're like, it's only going to be really great if out in the wild it can survive. And hopefully even beyond, right? Beyond just our linear filmmaking, beyond, to what's next, and to Jason's point about the creators of the future.
The one thing I'd love to touch on there that Karen, you sort of touch on is it's about liberation, right? So you're liberating the creative thought for us. And that's always these moments in filmmaking that have happened. It's like when the 8mm camera came out and somebody could borrow their dad's camera and, go and film little movies, and that guy turns around to be, the next Steven Spielberg or whatever it is. The other part of this is it really starts to allow young filmmakers into it,
Totally.
Right? It's kind of like when the digital camera came out and everybody was poo-pooing digital, like, oh, that's not developing film. But what it did, it gave access to so many people to photography. And as a result, photography got better because more people were doing it, more people were using it.
And it's before it's too late, right? It's when you can still iterate and you can still have some ideas, and maybe you're going to change a story beat or two. And that would be so costly, like real costs, but like emotional costs too, right? So now you've got that flexibility.
The other thing is, what bringing people like that to the table is they're not just able to explain how they work in a slightly different kind of avenue of what we do, but they're able to really teach that to people and say, this is how I would light it, and this is why, and the theme, etc. But also the feedback loop is massively changed. So instead of going, well, I would kiss the cheek with that and maybe this, that, the other, and then 2 days later seeing it and going, oh, I just blew 20 hours of artist time, but literally seeing it like, oh, that was a bad idea. And so, the other thing we can do is we can fail faster, right? So we can try and we can experiment and we can produce things. And I will say this, one of the biggest problems we faced is the fear of failure in our industry has gone away. In big studios, there's this huge thing that you have to do, and you have to crank out so much foot per week, etc. And in the early 90s and the mid 90s, you went to work. We had no idea what we were doing. You just got a bunch of clever people together, and you just hoped you'd crank out some cool images before that movie released. Well, now what we're doing is we're able to experiment like that. We're able to go and try and light a different thing or try and do a thing because we can turn it around so fast. And so what that does is artists and the technical crew and everybody have started to really just not be afraid of trying new things. And that is where filmmaking comes in. Because for us, it was those moments where, the artist would give the director, Bill Joyce, what he wanted, but they would be like, but we did this as well because it took, 3 minutes to do this version. And there are so many moments in our project which came from people just being able to try stuff and not worry that, they were going to bring the whole pipeline down doing it. I would love to know, Kevin, for us, we've spoken about how this has been like this revolution of lighting and all this kind of thing, but a lot of the work you do is really like design-based, etc. Have you found like it's changed the way you approach that phase of animation?
Yeah, I mean, from the time we very first started the short we made in Unreal, we normally take a really storyboard-driven approach. And because we were working in Unreal, we took a different approach on this one that we'd never tried before, where before drawing any panels or anything, we actually just drew a map of the scene where we were going to be and thought, okay, the character's going to start here and swim over to this place and jump around here, and all this stuff is going to happen around here. Like real like choreography, basically, kind of like on actually filming this thing on like a live action set or something like that. We just never approached things that way. And so one of the things we really tried to bring into Unreal was the ability to make completely just emotion-based decisions on what we were doing. We didn't want the engine telling us, if you put the light here, it's going to end up looking like this. We're like, I'll tell you where I want these shadows to fall, and I'll decide how I want these highlights and these shadows, like what color I want them to be, or like I don't care if it's realistic or not. I want this thing fogged out like this. And we were just talking about it earlier today, that every single shot we really did approach like a 2D design essentially, in the way that we made decisions. I mean, we've never worked with a 3D software where we were able to see lighting decisions happen in real time. And so we would just jump on these calls together, and the one person who's doing the lighting is just sharing their screen. And let's just try moving the light over here, change the color of that shadow. Let's desaturate this thing back here. And I sort of just entered a mode in my brain as if I was working on a painting, but I could actually see them making those changes in real time, and then press play, and then the whole painting is moving all of a sudden. So it was really cool to finally just be able to kind of wrangle it in a way. Like, I feel like anytime we approach a new software, it's always we're trying to wrangle it into thinking the way that our brains think about design. And I thought it was really cool that Unreal has that flexibility, that you are able to wrangle it and get it to a place where you can just make like real artistic decisions and just treat it like you would a painting. Yeah.
From your perspective, what does the future of this space look like? Are we talking about does Transmedia now fit into this in some fashion? Where do you see kind of this all headed, and where do you see it headed for you and the work that you're doing? Jason, why don't we start with you?
I mean, look, Transmedia is obviously the hot ticket item that's on everyone's mind. When you create a fully CG project or an animated project, you have all these assets, and the fact that we're getting everything and have an entire workflow that is inside and out of the engine, we knew that from the get-go from a production standpoint, and we knew that we wanted to create an open world environment so that it could be repurposed for gaming, for whatever we needed it later, to make a virtual backlot so that if we wanted to do a second season of Fables, for example, we could just go back and update a few textures, read the scripts, and go to our virtual backlot and reshoot an entire season with some new performances, with half of the asset costs that aren't in the new scripts. So the way that we approach it is that when we build our environments, we just don't build facades. We don't just build the interior of Ted's office. We actually build the house, we build the exterior, we build the entire city block as a huge immersive environment so that we can come back to it later and possibly have ties into gaming or VR or any of those transmedia avenues that are definitely coming down the line. So I think it's important for the future for the studios, the producers, the filmmakers, the writers to be all on the same page and understand that if this is the approach that you want to take, it can't be an afterthought. You need to understand from the get-go, from the first time pencil meets page, that you are going to either create an open world or a franchise that will spawn out into multiple avenues. And I think that's where the future of content, the future of multimedia, truly becoming multimedia, is headed for the future.
Before I ask the rest of you that same question, Jason, you brought up a good point. We've been hearing about transmedia for years now, and the creators have wanted to do it. The folks that are writing the checks for IP development and such, they want exactly what they need right now. Do you think that the studios and the stakeholders, can they embrace the dynamic need of creating these environments from a transmedia perspective? Do you think they're ready to embrace that now?
Well, I think one fundamental thing has changed from, years ago when transmedia and gaming and all these franchises started going, and now, and that is the engine. The fact that you can create environments, the fact that you can, I don't know what it is now, but over 15,000 usable Megascans assets to your disposal that are ready for the engine. And you can create entire Grand Canyon valleys and huge environments with one artist in a matter of a couple hours. Like that's the fundamental difference, is that open world used to be this thing where it would be like, oh my goodness, there's no way. We need to focus our attention on one set, what's in the script, everything like that. But now, because Unreal and Epic ultimately have made it so easy to get to take all those Lego building blocks and start creating sooner rather than later, now is the time where I feel like it's just going to skyrocket for the future. So I think, to David's point too, in that same time frame, you'll probably get double, if not triple more, and multiple uses out of it because of this workflow.
David, from your perspective, where does Transmedia fit into this?
I go backwards and forwards. I see Transmedia coming, and there are properties out there that are talking about it and using it. I wholeheartedly agree with Jason on building the world and then location scouting and just saying, this is essentially kind of thinking of filmmaking as a game. Like, here's the game we've built for you to go make your movie. I have this idea that how we're going to be able to work within those space with directors. So Transmedia is there in a way. Maybe I'm going to throw a bit of a bucket of cold ice on this. I struggle with the asset that works for a stylized animated project being an asset that could work photoreal in live action. I struggle with seeing that coming together because an asset that looks amazing in a photoreal project, it's just not that appealing in animation, and you do need to redo it. But there are properties out there, especially for AR, VR, worlds and connecting on your phone, etc., that should just be using all that same. So I kind of bounce backwards and forwards on that one a little bit. But again, it's based on the IP and the properties and kind of seeing where it is. If you've got big robots, maybe they would work. The future for us that I see this going is, I have to hand it to Epic and the kind of the short-term initiatives they created for a long-term goal, meaning let's get all these people together, let's listen to this so that in future versions of the engine, we can build tool sets that allow you to do that, right? For me, it's the same as what's happened in live action over the years, where some technology came about and we were able to go to filmmakers and say, you could now tell the story that you couldn't tell before, right? Famously, if you have a look at Avatar, I was at Digital Domain at the very beginning when Jim had Avatar and we couldn't make it. There was no way you could make it. That sat on the shelf for how many years until technology caught up to allow him to do that. So now what you're seeing, just as in live action, you saw movies and storylines coming out because we can age people up and down now and we can do all this kind of digital makeup. What I'm noticing now is that all of those cool storylines and those wacky kind of animated pieces that we saw at film festivals that the public didn't really get to see, those are becoming big projects. And so now what you're doing is we're enabling, for me in this, I kind of see animation as like the second golden era now, right? But now what we're doing is we're saying to filmmakers and animation directors, etc., we're going, we'll do however you want it. And so you're getting the style of animation is lining up with the style of the story of the show, And so for me, this moment of tools like Unreal entering the animation industry is allowing those filmmakers to come to us with projects and us collaborate with filmmakers that just a handful of years ago we would not have attempted. It would have been too expensive. We wouldn't have been able to pull the looks off. And that's for me right now, and what we're focused on a lot right now, a couple of our projects fall into that realm of it's just a whole new world with the style of animation. And I see what Epic are doing with Unreal, like Karen mentioned earlier, it's enabling the industry. And I think that at the end of the day, that's what the moment is right now. We're in this enablement moment.
Getting to the whole transmedia thing, we started conceiving of maybe there's a whole Yuki-verse beyond this where there's interactive adventures you can take with these characters and get to know them even beyond this. I feel like the project's been growing into a larger bubble that Unreal is sort of providing to us. Like, we started kind of really focused in this one area, and then now the possibilities are sort of expanding because of Unreal. I think it just opens up the boundaries of where we think and how we conceive of ideas. I think it sort of just broadens the horizons of how we can even just come up with ideas for properties and come up with ideas for films in a way that's just a lot more freeing and exciting to think about.
Yeah, transmedia was one of those exotic words, and now it's not so exotic anymore. We sort of know what it means. Now the new buzzword is metaverse or multiverse, or and so those words are going to come and go. But the thing that will make them be fully realized are groups like this and people like this, artists like this, authors, right? People who are in charge of their vision and know and have a point of view and have the tools at the ready that can, exploit that point of view. So I think, to Jason's point of conceptualizing all of that initially, then set forth and create your transmedia piece, then set forth and create the thing that's going to go into the metaverse and the rules are going into the metaverse. It all kind of has to come from the same seed. And we're finally at that moment, I think, with, all of the momentum and the freedom and the collaboration, everything we've referenced here with this cool tool, and we're interested in, future-wise, shoring that up more, making those tools stronger, listening, so that feedback loop is tight, right? And that then the community can kind of grow, and then you have second and third and fourth order, effects of that. But I do believe at the end of the day, that only really works if it really comes from that specific, point of view, that artist point of view, and it doesn't feel like an add-on, and it doesn't feel like a marketing play, or doesn't feel like I'm trying to show you something that really isn't genuine to the source material. And I think for the first time, I'm ready to say transmedia is an exotic word again, because I'm believing in it again when I'm seeing these worlds being created, the stories that are coming out of these worlds.
I'm so energized by what I've been listening to, and listen, we, in what I do and what AWN does, we chronicle these things. We see kind of the final result of so much great work. You guys are doing it. You have the perspective and insight with regards to how to take all these conversion technologies to enable creativity, which ultimately ends up on all these various, screens where we watch it. Karen, why don't you summarize what's been talked about here, with your final thoughts?
Oh, I'll give it a try. It's a heavy responsibility, but that's why we went to you. Dan, that's why I'm so happy to talk to you, because you are a chronicler and you really care, and you're really seeing what's happening. You're noting it. You're asking questions about it. And so, when I think about this opportunity that we have with Unreal, and with the community that's coming up on its own, even with or without us. It's so fascinating to see. And what I'm interested in doing is continuing to say, here's this thing, here's this tool. What do you want to do with it? And then just getting out of the way as much as we can, right? And let that happen. And I think that's what allows folks who have been in the industry for a super long time to come back and relearn something, but bringing all that mad skill, get the kids involved, right? And get high schoolers involved, new college grads, people who are interested in creating imagery and creating story, right? Such a huge gamut. And I think the tools will just get that much more. The more sophisticated they get, the easier they should be able to wield also. So I'm hopeful that that's going to be the future as well. And the fidelity just gets better. And that, the point isn't to sort of, so much in like studio land, it's like to dominate. And I don't think that's the point here, right? It's such, in its culture, it's such this sort of giving and collaborative space. It's really about elevating. So maybe we'll leave it with that.
Very, very well said. And with that, I want to thank all our panelists, David Prescott, Jason Chen, Kevin Dart, and of course, Karen Dufilho, our friends at the Pulse, Epic and Unreal Engine folks, and of course, all of you for tuning in. With that, thanks everybody. This was fantastic.